Welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Brandon, and today we're looking at Nikke. Specifically, we're looking at the shot bar list. With that in mind, we're going to kind of go from top bottom as we describe the deck itself, and then look at the deck overall. Starting at the top end, this bar top end, the top end that has been kind of talked about for a good period of time now. We want to go over that in a little bit more depth before we dive into the full deck. Starting at the top, we have a three-part package that all make up what essentially makes the combo work. We have the Finale Noir. When placed on stage, everything gets +1 soul until end of turn. And then on the bar, as long as you have the other 3/2 in play, this card gets the following ability until end of turn. All of the shot trigger damage gets +1. So anytime you trigger a shot and the opponent cancels the damage, whenever you deal the shot damage, deal an additional +1. If you just trigger a shot with just one of these on board, shot is for 2. Additionally, when you play the climax, it also gives all of your characters the ability to look at the top 2 cards, choose up to 2 cards, and either put them back on top of deck in any order or put the rest into waiting room. So this allows you to essentially dig for a climax to be able to trigger. Ideally, you're triggering shots, that way you can get your additional shots damage off at the top. The card that it paired with, the Showtime Blanc. This allows you to on-play draw 1, gets additional power, and on place on stage, you can ditch 2 cards to shovel back 3 cards into your opponent's deck from their waiting room. Pretty vanilla in regards to card, but it's required for your top-end combo to play. The third card that pairs with this is the Noir Black Rabbit. This is what makes this combo work really well. If a bar climax is placed, all of your climaxes in all zones gain shot trigger. So if it is a shot trigger already, it gains an additional version of shot. If you have multiple of these, they stack. So you can add multiple shot triggers to all climaxes, which is fantastic. It's also a frontal assist of 1500 power to Nikke characters. Realistically, you're playing this for the additional stacking of shot triggers. So that way when you trigger a climax with your end game combo, you can swing for a bunch of shot triggers, assuming damage is canceled. You're swinging big, so damage probably will get canceled. And then any damage that's canceled then turns into a bunch of shot triggers. Those bunch of shot triggers are all enhanced because of the Finale Noir. So when we reach an endgame state, our ideal board for our endgame is 2 of the Finale Noirs, 1 of the Showtime Blancs, and 2 of the Noir Black Rabbits in the back row. Now, that is kind of like the ideal standardized endgame, so you can get the most out of your combos. One thing you could also potentially do is trade out an initial copy of the Finale Noir with another of the 2 ones, so that way you can have 3 2-1s on board, so you have additional shots even beyond that, especially if you're trying to go into a little bit more. If your deck is more compressed, so you have more chances to get the climax with as less searches. Essentially, the 2 of the Finale Noirs allows you to go through up to 5 cards, 4 cards off the top of the deck in instances of 2, and then if no climax is in there, you can mill all of those, and then whatever the last one in the top card of the deck is. So essentially 5 tries at a climax. That being your combination of cards at the top, funnily enough, is still not enough yet, because we aren't done here. That bar climax additionally pairs with a level 1 combo as well. It's a Cigarettes, which is a attack, mill 2, and then salvage equal to those levels combined off the 2 cards you milled. And additionally, we get 2000 powers when you have 2 or more during your turn, so it's 7/5 on attack. You can replenish stuff in hand off of the bar combo you are already running. So effectively, we have a combo at 1 and a combo at 3 off of the same climax, so we can loop that, especially since bar bumps back to hand whenever you trigger it. It makes it easier to loop those kinds of combos. So we have a free slot, essentially, that we can use for an additional combo. That being said, I'm choosing to do the shot, which pairs with the Snakebite Viper. When Snakebite Viper comes onto stage, you can choose a Nikke character in your waiting room and marker it. And as long as this character has a marker, when it goes to the waiting room during your turn, you may encore it for free, effectively. you can put it back on stage as rested, as long as there was a marker underneath it originally. When the combo happens, the combo itself, as long as you have 2 or more other characters, reveal the top card of the deck, and if it's a character, add it to hand. So essentially, it is a free combo that can kind of respawn itself back to stage, so you can not feel too bad about it playing it later in the game, because even though it'll be smaller than your opponent, it can bounce back to your field and still stay on board and still kind of block some potentially additional soul coming your way. It normally would be free from a crashed lane. I think that that's a really nice side combo, something you can do at 0, and it pairs in with your end game as well, with having additional shot triggers in your deck. Additionally, on top of that, I think that combo pairs really well with the Terrorist Crow, which allows you to, when this character attacks, you may discard a character from stage, and if you do, reveal a top card of the deck, and if it's a character, add it. If you are ditching a reversed character, a character that's already crashed on the field, or the Snakebite Viper, it's essentially a free condition, because you're already going to lose the character that was crashing anyway, so might as well turn that character into another character. Or with the Snakebite Viper, because it can come back to field, you're not actually losing anything by removing it from field, because it can encore for free back to stage. So I think 3+ing is pretty awesome with that in regards to just additional cards back into hand. It is any character specifically, which is why we don't run any kind of events in this deck, but it's also not limited to a certain level, which I think is important here. But rounding out our level 1 game is the Brainstormer. During your turn, it gets an additional 4,000 power, so it sits at 7k on attack, so it can actually be a front row attacker, which is pretty nice. It also has the ability of pay 1, rest 2 characters, any character, and then you brainstorm for 5 and then search based off of the brainstorm. So you're able to mill through 5 cards with the brainstorm. You're able to progress a little bit further with the brainstorm. I think this is a pretty solid addition to the deck. It's also an attacker. You can also use the back row 0 combo and rest those 2 as your back row pieces to be able to do the combo and brainstorm for it as well. So I think that between all those pieces, that works out really well. So we have a pretty solid advantage engine here going in the mid game. Going into level 0, we already kind of talked about our combo, but to kind of solidify the rest of the deck, we have a lot of different pieces that allow us that kind of flexibility. I think actually one of the big parts of this does tie in here with our coin flip. Our model senior student Ray, beginning of your opponent's attack phase, all your characters are Nikke, which they are. You may mill 1 from the top of your deck. If you do, and that card is level 2 or lower, this card gets the ability to bounce back 1 frontal attack to your hand. Since 90% of your deck is level 2 or lower, legitimately we have 3 characters that are not, and then the 4 climax, or 8 climaxes total. So those are your only misses on the deck. I think this is a pretty fantastic card to keep cards in hand. It also allows us to be able to really generate an advantage that way as well. Be able to use those cards in hand to maybe turn them into something else. One of those ways we do that is with our helmet. This is a search helmet. When you use the act after playing on stage, you put this card at the bottom of your deck, you discard a card from hand, and then you search for a character and add to hand. You can turn the coin flip into any card that you're looking for specifically. I think the helmet's also really nice here because the helmet, as long as there's a shot climax in your climax area, this is also a shot trigger. Because the 2/1 turns bars into shots when they're in play, starting at level 2, any climax you play, this also becomes a shot, effectively. So a deck that's trying to push damage by shots, having some additional shots isn't a terrible thing. Worth noting that it doesn't gain additional shots if it's not a climax, but it is still a generic shot as well. So, worth noting. Additionally, with this lineup as well, I run the Rapid Classic Vacation. This is essentially bounce back to hand when a climax is placed, give something 1,000 power, and the ability to look at top two, put one on top of deck, put one into waiting room. So essentially, effectively choose your trigger. As well as long as you have two or more other Nikke characters, you may draw a card and then ditch a card. I use this as a draw support. I use this as ability to pair with the Terrorist Crow to be able to guarantee to guarantee a character to hand, or if I know that there's not going to be a character to hand, that I don't pay the cost of the thing itself, so I'm not wasting resources in that way. But essentially, the draw power to be able to draw into climaxes or draw into something else or filter hand in some kind of way, I use this as an additional hand filter. Especially because it's slamming climaxes just about every turn. This is a very repeatable hand filter. We also run the And Miracle Fairy. This is our drop search, just as a 2 of. However, it also has the added benefit if you trigger a bar attack with this card specifically, you may salvage a character from hand for free. So that's pretty awesome. Is that going to happen very often? No, but when it does, is that cool? Absolutely. But it's a non-reverse drop search that goes to memory. I think having a non-reverse drop search at 1 is, or having a non-reverse drop search at 0 is pretty fine. Just the ability to on-demand search at 0 to 1, I think, is important enough to have at least 2 copies of this in play. This is probably one of the first ones you would cut if you're making changes. There's a couple of cards that I think are pretty flexible slots in that regard. I think this is one of them. But at the same time, also going to memory is not terrible here either, so it's less cards in deck, so more chances to hit a climax in the end game. Dragon of the Deep, Guillotine is also a pretty decent one as well. Has the ability to potentially snipe level 0s as long as they're the only one in center stage. But also the ability to, when it goes to waiting room, put the top card of your stock into clock, search for a cost of 0 character, and put it on your stage rested. So when this goes to waiting room after your opponent has killed it, you could put potentially your level 1 combo on stage if they level you up, rested, so that way all of a sudden you have this level 1 combo ready to go on that turn. I think this is fine. I'll use this a lot for green fix on my level, personally, but I think that having this at 0 is really nice as well. Beyond 0, it's basically a dead card, I think. Unless you're trying to intentionally sack it off with one of your other characters. That's just a throwaway piece, but I think you have better throwaway pieces. I has it a 3 of just because I think that potential to clock yourself is important. But again, this is another one of those cards that can be easily filtered out into something else. I also run the Scarlet Black Shadow. This is, I think, a free plus kind of idea. It's a clock self, effectively, to get a card into hand. So on play, it is a pay 1 climax swap from deck. So I can turn shots into bars at the end game, and putting a shot trigger back into my deck, which I think is pretty fantastic. We also have as the other ability for this card, when this card goes to waiting room, you can choose as long as you have another Nikke character, choose a blue card in waiting room, aka itself. Put it into clock, look at the top 2 cards of the deck, choose a level 1 or lower character, and add it to your hand. With this deck being mostly level 1 and 0s, you hit this fairly often, so just another 3+ into hand. This is the one I would typically use as like a Ricky type of idea. The idea to get yourself into 1, so you're not level locked. I typically use this one because it's stockless, so that way I can keep my stock for my endgame stuff. I have a secondary climax swap as well. This is a kind of a traditional climax swap from waiting room back into hand. I run as a 1 of, because between the Scarlet Black Shadow and then the Annoying Freema that we have 4 in our deck, so it's more of just depending on where the climax is and where access I have. The last card that we have not talked about yet is the Remember Me Delta. This is just a drop salvage, so pay 1, pitch 1, salvage a character from waiting room, Back to hand, give something 1,000 power when you do. It also has top check, rearrange 2. I use this as drop salvage so that way I can get cards from waiting room. Waiting room access is fairly limited in this deck. It is basically the level 1 combo and then this card. So I run this as a 1-of just to make sure that I can get the pieces that I need. With that in mind, that is the deck. Looking at this deck in a little bit more of a holistic idea, there's a lot of zeros, a lot of ones. You're playing a very small game early. This is very much a damage dealing deck versus a board deck. You're not trying to necessarily win board like crazy, but rather you're opening up lanes against yourself. You're potentially opening yourself up to a decent amount of damage, which is probably fine. You actually don't mind that because you want to get to 3 first anyway. Because if you get to 3, the idea is that you can be able to close out your opponent from when you get 3. This has a pretty decent range to this top end, so you actually have a pretty decent threat range of kill once you actually get there. When you get there, it's pretty crazy. That's been the deck. It's been fun to play with. It's been fun to mess around with. It's fun to see the explosion go off the top. That being said, in terms of meta viability, I think there's some things that you have to worry about as well. I think that you are susceptible to things that prevent damage, which is going to be interesting to see how much that becomes a factor later. That being said, you have the ability to potentially bump up a lot of soul on your characters because you get the +1 soul on all your characters when played for those 2 noirs that you could potentially side over things. So especially if you're keeping a very close game, that you only need a smaller amount of damage to go through, you could potentially side over your opponent's characters. But that being said, it should be interesting to see what that looks like, especially if you're trying to guarantee the damage to stick. So I think that you have a lot of versatility with this deck and a lot of things you go through. Notably, it doesn't have some of those modern tools like Stock Swap in this list, because realistically, I don't think you need it because you're trying to power through anyway. You're trying to stick a bunch of damage. Oh man, if you swing for 5 and the 5 sticks, you just stuck 5 damage. I don't think you're too worried about that point. That's most of the wave there, and you should have a couple other swings to go. So I think you have a pretty high damage output here. That I think that that alone is enough to be able to put pressure on your opponent in a lot of ways. And because you have the ability to finesse some of that kind of damage, whether you could swing for 3s or 2s for shots, and on many of those shots, based off of the number of 2-1s you have, you could kind of plan in advance what your kind of strategy will be before you get there, so you can sculpt it to exactly what you need. You have a lot of tools in this deck to be able to get those exact cards and kind of continually have additional resources in hand to be able to make that happen. There's a lot of flexibility here that may not read well on paper, but it in practice goes really well. So that being said, that's been the deck. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe to the YouTube thing, and then we'll see you in the next one next week. Bye.